What is up, Tube users? I'm the Stereotypical Gamer, and welcome back to another installment of Overwatch 2 Heroes, an in-depth guide. Today, we are taking a look at one of my least played tank heroes, but in the right circumstances, he's honestly one of the most fun tank heroes to play, and that is Reinhart. Let's dive right into things and talk about his primary fire. Reinhardt's primary fire is Rocket Hammer. This is a melee attack that deals 85 damage per swing and slightly knocks back enemies in the direction of the swing. Reinhardt can swing his hammer at just over 1 swing per second. He will always start swinging counterclockwise, and if he continues to hold down his primary fire, he will swing clockwise and then back to counterclockwise. This is important because since this is a melee attack, Ryan is able to cleave multiple enemies by moving his camera with the direction of the swing. Since Ryan is also primarily a melee hero, he does not have a quick melee attack. If he uses his melee button, he'll instead swing his rocket hammer normally. A few things to note about this ability is using any of Reinhardt's other abilities will cancel the swing animation. It is also one of the few attacks that cannot be deflected by Genji's deflect. Now, let's go over his secondary fire. Reinhardt's secondary fire is Barrier Field. This is a rectangular shield Ryan puts up in front of himself that is just over 4 meters tall and 7 meters wide. The health of this barrier is the largest health pool for a shield at 1400 HP. Ryan will continue to hold up the shield as long as he holds his secondary fire button. Holding up his shield comes at a cost, however, of a 30% movement speed debuff. The shield will always be in front of Reinhardt and will move to whichever direction he's facing. The barrier does have a slight delay to it when changing directions, however, so keep that in mind when you're looking around with your barrier up. While the barrier is up, Reinhardt's camera changes to a third-person perspective. This can be a good way to scout out enemy positions without going out of cover. Holding down the primary fire button while the barrier is up allows Ryan to freely look around without moving his barrier. Now, let's dive into Reinhardt's first ability. Reinhardt's first ability is Charge. This ability allows Ryan to charge forward for up to 3 seconds. While charging, Reinhardt gains a 200% movement speed buff. During his charge, if an enemy is directly in front of Reinhardt's charging path, they will be pinned, which deals 50 damage and stuns them and prevents them from doing anything. Reinhardt can only pin one enemy in a charge. If an enemy is pinned, Ryan will carry them with him for his charge, and if he charges into a wall, the enemy will take an additional 225 damage. If they are not pinned to a wall, they will suffer only a slight knockback. During the charge, Reinhardt's turning radius is reduced, making it harder for him to turn. Now, let's move on to Ryan's next ability. Reinhardt's second ability is Fire Strike. This is a ranged projectile that deals 100 damage to enemies caught within its path. This projectile is fairly slow moving at only 25 meters per second, which makes it easy to avoid. This ability will pierce through enemies and enemy barriers, allowing it to hit multiple targets even through a barrier. This ability also has 2 charges, so Ryan can use 2 of them in quick succession. The cast time for this ability and the recover time is just over 1 second, so there is a slight delay in firing both strikes quickly. Now, let's move on to Reinhardt's ultimate ability. Reinhardt's ultimate ability is Earth Shatter. This is an area of effect ultimate that shatters the ground in front of Ryan in a cone-shaped area up to 20 meters away. Enemies within about 2 meters of the initial shatter will take 120 damage. Enemies outside that range will take 50 damage, but all enemies caught within the ultimate are knocked down and stunned for just under 3 seconds. While this ability looks like it only affects enemies on the ground, it does have a bit of height to it at about 2 meters, so flying heroes can fly out of range of it, but most heroes can't jump out of it. If Reinhardt is airborne while casting this ability, the ability won't go off until Ryan hits the ground. A couple of interesting things to note is Reinhardt is unaffected by Zarya's ultimate Graviton Surge while he's casting his ultimate. Another important thing to note is enemy barriers that are on ground level will stop or shatter in its tracks. Now that we've gone over all his abilities, let's talk about heroes that counter and are countered by Rein. Reinhart is an excellent tank hero at creating space up close and holding tight choke points, thanks to his high damage melee attacks and his ability to cleave multiple enemies at a time. A tank hero Rein plays well against is Zarya. Zarya is all about absorbing damage to power up her particle cannon, but because of Rein's slow attack speed, she can't do that effectively against him. Plus, Rein's shield can block a lot of Zarya's damage with ease. A DPS hero Rein plays well against is Reaper. Reaper is a hero that needs to be up close to enemies in order to maximize his damage, which can be difficult when dealing with a tank that can out-damage him at those close ranges, and is pretty effective at blocking a lot of his damage. A support hero that Rein plays well against is Brigitte. Brigitte is also a melee hero, but with a much lower health pool and damage output compared to Reinhardt. And while she can counter his charge, when she does this, she knocks both her and Rein down for 2 seconds, and during that time, Brigitte is definitely more vulnerable. Now, let's go over heroes that counter Reinhardt. While Reinhardt is a great tank hero for taking space up close, he suffers from having limited range attacks and little escapability. The tank hero that plays well against Rein is Ramatra. Ramatra is excellent at dealing poke damage to Rein at a safe range, plus his melee punches in Nemesis form can go through Rein's shield and can range his melee attacks. As for a DPS hero that plays well against Rein, I'm going to go with Pharah. Rein has no real way to deal with flying heroes other than throwing a couple fire strikes, which can easily be avoided. Because of that, it makes it easy for Pharah to farm damage on a Reinhardt safely. Finally, a support hero that plays well against Reinhardt is Mercy, mainly for the same reason as Pharah. Because she is able to fly around, Reinhardt has virtually no way of stopping Mercy herself. Now that we've talked about all the counters, let's dive into some tips and tricks for Reinhardt. My first tip that I have for Reinhardt when playing him is because he can cancel his charge by pressing the button again, you can easily knock people off the map by canceling the pin at the right time. And when you do this, what you want to do is hit another melee attack on enemies that are going off the map to just give them a little bit nudge more outwards, and that way you can guarantee most of the time, even with heroes that have movement abilities, they'll usually not be able to get back onto the map. Because it is a little bit tricky though, trying to boop enemies off the map with a charge, the best way I can say to practice this is to actually go to the practice range and go to the ranged enemy bot there and just practice charging that bot off the map, just to get a hang of when you want to stop charge so you don't knock yourself off the map. It can be worth it sometimes to knock yourself off the map, especially with a hero like D.Va that can fly back, so sometimes you do want to just charge yourself off the map, but I mean, for the most part, you want to stay alive with your team. One of the best things you can do as Reinhardt is to just hold choke points by just constantly swinging. Since your swings have a slow swing time, you just want to be swinging at different choke points. So if enemies do push through that choke point, you're going to be getting a lot of damage on them. And it's always best to hold a choke point with some sort of line of sight for you. Even though his shield has a lot of health, once his shield's down, he's pretty vulnerable. And so just holding a line of sight so enemies can't attack you while you're trying to swing and stuff is a super useful tactic. Another tip I have for you guys, if you use your ultimate and are able to get multiple enemies stunned in your ultimate, is to use fire strikes on them. Especially if you have both, I would just spam both fire strikes because it's the best way to get a lot of damage on targets quickly. For the most part, you don't really want to do anything else. You can melee swing them, but your fire strikes deal more damage than your melee swing, so it's always better to use that instead of just melee attacking enemies. Because Rein has one of the highest armor health pools in the game, I typically don't use my barrier shield until I get down to my white health, because the armor reduction that armor health gives you is a really good way, if you have supports with you, for them to farm up their ult charge. And then once you get to your white health, which is a little bit more scary because it deals normal damage, you can use your barrier then, and you basically have a 1400 extra health that way. But that's all the tips and tricks I have for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure to leave a like if you did. Comment any other tips you have for Ryan. I would really love to know them. I love this hero. And make sure to hit that subscribe button. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.